Kelly Bear here. You'll have to excuse the very edge of my pop filter for my mic peeking in there because I've had a few people comment to say that some of my previous videos have been quite quiet. I don't know why, because I'm using the same setup as I usually use, but I don't want people to struggle to hear me, so I have pulled the mic closer. I have done a sound check as I usually do, and it sounds fine to me. This is the thing, right? When I've done sound checks for my previous videos, I've had, what I do is I split it from, my volume goes up to 100, not 11. And if it's oh, I just realised my camera is in a bit of a weird position. It was sort of tilting up a bit. Anyway, I should have sorted that out before. I didn't realise. I was so focused on the audio that I wasn't looking at the video. If I put it at 50, so halfway between, and I can hear myself well, I call that good. So then anything else sort of feels like a, you know, good way to sort of gauge it. I don't know. I should probably ask my spouse, who is literally a recording engineer, but you know, they've got enough on their plate. So this is going to be a philosophical waffle that also includes tarot. It's not about tarot, but I will be, well, I guess it's kind of about tarot as well. I'll be using the tarot to sort of demonstrate the things that I'll be speaking about. I've got a bunch of card combinations, 2 or 3 card combinations pulled out in front of me, like little mini readings or sort of demonstration flashcards, I don't know. So as you'll see from the title of this video, I don't know if I'm just going to call it discomfort or just getting used to discomfort, but also with a tagline of finding peace in chaos, because they kind of like sort of kicked off both of these things kicked off this thought process, and this has been mulling about in my head for a couple of weeks. Mulling about? Yeah, I've been mulling it about in my head. That's the term, right? All is to say, it's been really, really hot here in the UK. We've been having a heat wave, and it literally jumped from 20 degrees, which is quite sort of reasonable and bearable for the beginning of summer, to like 30, 31 degrees. So that is a very big jump when you think of the difference between, like, say 20 degrees and 10 degrees Celsius. It's a big jump to go from one day to the other, and they just have consecutive days of just too warm. And it's uncomfortable. I've often spoken about how summer is a very uncomfortable month for me. It's a bit of a sensory nightmare on a number of fronts, but I will go into that. So I was having this thought, and I don't know if it was because I was too hot or I was just uncomfortable or something, or there was something, I can't remember what it was. Something kicked off the thought, and I took out my phone and I was listening to a podcast, and for the life of me I can't remember what podcast it was, what episode it was, or anything. And I wish that I had made a note, because I thought I was going to remember, because I thought I was going to make this video sooner than I have. I didn't make a video last week, so I'm back here this week. I've had a 2-week break, but as I was typing out, sometimes we need to get used to discomfort. The podcast I was listening to, the person that was, there's 2 people, one of the people on the podcast said, yeah, sometimes you need to sit in discomfort and get used to it and get comfortable with discomfort. And I was like, whoa! It like literally freaked me out, because that wasn't the topic of what the podcast was about, but it was something that this person had gone on to a tangent to say just as I was typing it, and it was really weird because I wasn't expecting that to happen. So that was a little bit of synchronicity there for you. I thought I'd mention that. It's not important to this video, but I just thought it was a fun little tidbit of information. My phone might go off at some point while I'm filming, because I am expecting a phone call at some point today, so I might have to pause, but I do have some notes written down, so I'm hoping that's going to help me keep on track with what I want to say. I do have an iced decaffeinated latte. It's really nice though. Oh, lovely. Lovely and refreshing. So let's get into it. So there's all sorts of forms of discomfort, right? There's physical discomfort, there's mental discomfort, there's emotional discomfort. There's all sorts of different forms of discomfort, and everyone's threshold for discomfort is going to be different, depending on your upbringing, where you were born, where you live now. So many factors, right? Your physicality, what your physical capabilities are, and what your limitations are. So many things, so many different types of discomfort. And so getting comfortable with discomfort, I'm just going to talk about the things that I find that I've had to sort of get comfortable with, and then I'll also go on to talk about, you know, it's like setting out an essay. So at first I'm going to talk about the forms of discomfort that I think, for me at least, are important and I need to learn to live with. Then I will talk about some kinds of discomfort that are sort of, the first ones which are good forms of discomfort, right? The next ones are going to be forms of discomfort, but they're unavoidable, so you kind of have to make your peace with them. And then the third part will be me talking about forms of discomfort that we do not accept or should not accept, and what those are and how we go about sort of tackling that. So yes, I'll be using my tarot. So for me, some forms of discomfort are necessary, and they can lead to growth, and they should lead to growth. And some of those are things like small sacrifices that you might make with regards to maybe environmental impact. So for example, a really good one is more people who are omnivores are choosing to eat less meat. And if they are eating meat, if they can afford it, because obviously there is some level of privilege when it comes to a lot of these issues as well, in being able to make those choices, choosing to be more mindful about the meat that they do purchase and eat. And the same with fishing. If they eat fish, they're making sure, some people are choosing to make sure that the fish that they do eat isn't fish that is at risk, that's overfished, overfarmed, that kind of thing. So that's one example of a small sacrifice that you can make. You might really, really like meat, right? Or really, really like fish, but you're making this small sacrifice. And it might seem a bit uncomfortable at first, but you kind of get used to it. You might decide to switch out to like having some tofu, which is funny because here in the UK, tofu is seen as like the vegan and vegetarian alternative, whereas, in the Southeast Asia, tofu is just seen as another category of something that you eat. It's not seen as an alternative. It is just another option, right? So, that's one example. Or choosing to not purchase. There's forms of discomfort you might feel if you choose to boycott certain companies, and the longer that you boycott them, you will sort of get used to it. So for example, I remember when I first boycott Nestle, which is a really, really long time ago at this point, because this was when all the news about the whole milk formula thing came out, which is a really long time ago now. And I went vegetarian at 13, so I was vegetarian, I wasn't vegan at the time. But my God, did I love me a Kit Kat. And it sounds really silly, but for a young person to give up Kit Kats, that was my sacrifice. I've been watching too much Our Flag Means Death, gone all Kiwi. Was a really small way that I could show my solidarity. And it wasn't just Kit Kats, it was anything that I saw had Nestle on it. And my mum would roll her eyes. My mum was a single mum struggling, and she would just buy whatever she could afford or whatever was on offer. So a lot of the time it was the supermarket own brand stuff, but sometimes there would be certain cereals or whatever, and she'd get it, and I would have to eat what was put in front of me. It was really, really tricky. And that would be uncomfortable, because ultimately we're working with what we've got here. We don't have much money. We're a small family, and we're struggling, and this is what my mum's picked up. So stuff like that. I then went vegan, but for me, going vegan wasn't a sacrifice because I've never liked meat. Actually, tell a lie, it was a sacrifice because I love cheese. And when I told my friends that I was going to go vegan, every single one of them laughed in my face, and I didn't even say I was going vegan full stop. I said I was going vegan for 1 month to see how it goes. Literally every person I told, family, friends, colleagues, were like, you, Miss Cheese Obsessed. I was like, yep, yes, me, cheese obsessed. And I was nervous because giving up cheese was a really, really big deal for me. Like when I say I like cheese, like obsessed, love cheese. And the cheese alternatives back then, but this was back in 2009, were not great. And some of them are not great now, but there's been some really great breakthroughs with the cheese these days. So I guess that was a sacrifice. But after like a month, I was like, I'll do it for another month and another month. And by 6 months, I was like, wow, I've kind of like done this, and my way around it was just not to really bother with cheese alternatives because I didn't find them very good, and so I just sort of cut the idea of cheese out of my diet. Now I do use some vegan cheeses, but I don't use a huge amount of them because I've just gotten so used to not, oh god, sorry, I've just gotten so used to not really worrying about them, eating them. If I find one that's really nice, I might treat myself to it, and there's a really great place in Hoxton called the Fromagerie, and the last 2 Christmases we've ordered a cheese board from them, a cheese hamper, which has been our treat to ourselves, and that's been amazing because it had some beautiful cheeses in it. Really great vegan camembert, really great truffle cheese, oh yummy. Anyway, so that's an example of like small forms of discomfort. I sort of feel like I've sort of belaboured the point a little bit on that one, but you know what I mean. There are other forms of discomfort which can seem small, but can make people feel really weirded out, and one of those is silence. Whether that is sitting in silence in the company of someone, or sitting in silence by yourself and enjoying your own company and not feeling the need to have a podcast on in the background or music on or what have you. And I can be guilty of like I love podcasts. I'm always listening to something, whether I'm cooking, doing chores, you know, I'm sitting here sewing and I'm listening to podcasts or episodes of Critical Role, which is like a Dungeons and Dragons game, which they also put out as a podcast. I watch the video version because I listen to it while I'm working, but if I want to look up and see what's going on screen, I can. So I keep that as an option. But like, I still am comfortable with my own company, and I'm comfortable in silence. You know, if I'm at my altar, I'm sitting in silence and I'm meditating. If I'm meditating in the mornings or the evenings, or I'm laying on my acupressure mat, and you know, I'll often do that in silence or with some rain sounds on, which isn't silence, but it's sort of sitting within, not being stimulated by, you know, it's white noise essentially. So I'm not being stimulated by the thoughts of other people or the sounds of other people, you know, peopliness. And it's difficult because, you know, I live in London, and there's, as I want to say, there's always some cunt out the back making a fucking racket, because there is. And actually today is quiet for a change. I think they're finally finishing up the work on the library gardens and the building out the back that they are going to be renovating. They haven't actually fully started the renovations yet, so if you can hear grumbling, that is my tummy. I'm quite hungry. I had breakfast at like 7 and it was just a very small one. I'm realising that I probably should eat something after this. It's now 11:15. So yeah, so they, you know, I think learning to sit in silence is really important. I think especially if you are a practitioner of divination, if you are a practitioner of magic, I think being able to get silent and really tune in and listen to other messages that maybe that your body is sending, or that is sort of bubbling up from your subconscious, stuff like that, or that you might, if you class yourself as working as being psychic or intuitive and working with spirit allies, you know, depending on how you feel they might communicate with you, being able to tune into that. So silence is often needed, right, for those moments. So I think those forms of discomfort are really, really good. I think one of the most important forms of discomfort, and I am going to start getting to the tarot now, is the discomfort you feel when you're unlearning prejudices. And this really, like, there's loads of topics that this could be relevant to. It could be relevant to racism, homophobia, transphobia, that kind, all sorts of isms and phobias, right? Because when someone is told that what they're doing is racist or transphobic or homophobic, the first thing they want to do, right, is a lot of the time is people want to get defensive. And I've seen it said so many times, is that it seems that saying to someone that something that they're doing is problematic, like say for example being racist, they will act as if it's worse. Being told that what you're doing is racist is worse than the racism itself, which is ridiculous, right? Because it's made you feel uncomfortable. And just because you do something racist, it doesn't mean that you are inherently, well, that we all have inherent biases, right? That we all online. This is part of the discussion, right? but it doesn't mean that you're like the most awful person in the world. Sometimes we have unconscious biases that we just have to unlearn, and when you think about it and really sort of make a conscious effort to tackle it, you can sort of learn and grow, right? It's that whole Maya Angelou, once you know better you do better, right? So I would urge people not to be defensive, right? Whoever it is calling you out, but especially if it's a person of the group that you are. If a person of colour is saying that whatever you're doing is racist, or if a trans person is saying what you're saying is transphobic, you especially need to listen to them. So it shouldn't be upon people from those communities to have to educate other people. I think there's a very important part that, like, white people talking to other white people, for example, about their problematic behaviour when it comes to racism is something that needs to be happening more, right? But and then people will still get defensive. I've had so many conversations over the years with family members, especially older family members, who are just like, oh, but I'm just stuck in my ways, or blah blah blah. And I'm not very popular around the dinner table. Let's put it this way. People will roll their eyes. People go, oh, here she goes. Oh, she thinks she's better than us. And it's really, really difficult to always have to be that person. But I think it's something that just has to be said, because I just can't let it go. And it drives my family crazy, but they drive me crazy, right? So, like, swings and roundabouts, and they get so defensive, and I don't understand. Like, I kind of guess I understand, because when I was much younger, I would be like, oh, well, I'm not racist, even though something I might have done is right, because I see myself as a very liberal, lefty, right on kind of person. And I had to learn that, no, I still have inherent biases, and I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I'm perfect, and I'm a work in progress. We're all work in progresses. But I had to learn, look, no, there's times when things will bubble up, and I'm like, hang on, where's that from? Is that me thinking that? That's something I've been taught, and that's wrong. And I still do it to this day, where things will pop up, and I'm like, no, that's not right. Tackle that, right? So you have a decision to make. Your decision is to do you remain defensive? Okay, do you remain this defensive person and trying to maintain your position, or do you turn inwards after you've listened to the people that are speaking to you, or the person that's speaking to you, and do you reflect on that? Do you then start to see someone else's perspective, right? Do you reflect, and do you learn, and do you grow, and you see it from someone else's side, and be a better person from it, right? Sometimes, in the Smith way, the hangman is seen as a card of sort of not just a pause or an upending, but also of enlightenment. We think of Odin, right, on Yggdrasil. And so getting comfortable with discomfort when it comes to unlearning prejudices is so important. It's a massive part of it, and you'll learn that you just sort of you learn to sit in it and just sort of be like, yeah, like, this is, you need to process those emotions, and they feel gnarly and uncomfortable, but ultimately it's not that bad. It's not as bad as someone being racist towards someone. It's not as bad as, like, the fucking prejudices basically that marginalized people have to face, right? And I know from my own experience of being so heavily bullied throughout my entire, like, education, and being, parts of certain marginalized groups myself, how it feels when someone, for example, I'm bisexual, and the amount of biphobia that, I have received from both straight and gay people, it doesn't feel nice, especially when it comes from the queer community, because there's that level of, like, we're supposed to feel accepted within the queer community. And it's Pride Month, and of course the bi discourse is going around on Twitter yet again, as it does every year, and it's so exhausting. It is so exhausting. But it is what it is, and it's a fight, right? But there's just some examples of, some discomfort that I think are important and good, and can lead to growth and good things. So some forms of discomfort are unavoidable, and for me, these forms of discomfort are often to do with the way my brain's wired, and the things that I think I've read something that's called injustice sensitivity, which is something that we'll touch on a bit later, which I think causes a lot of these issues for me. But also, like, just my mind's always racing. So when I really, for example, when I really stop and I think about, I follow a lot of dogs on Instagram. I love dog accounts, like cute dogs. I follow a lot of special needs dogs as well. I like seeing how they're getting on, and I really like seeing people who have taken on dogs that would have otherwise just been discarded and put down, and just giving them a new lease of life and really taking care of them. It's really heartwarming to see, right? And when I see people rescuing dogs, and I start to think about all the dogs around the world that are strays, or that are in homes but are abused, or you know, like, I've got friends that have found they've got dogs that they rescued. My friend Meg, her dog Molly, they literally found in a rubbish bin when they were walking past a rubbish bin in their housing complex, and they heard a crying noise, and they opened the bin. It was a communal, you know, those big, like, trash dumpster bins that you call them dumpsters in the US, I think. I don't know what we really call them over here. Dumpsters, I guess, as well. And this tiny puppy, maybe 3-4 months old, and they took her in. They rescued her. They took her to the vet. No one would take her. They didn't want to. They just ended up keeping her because Meg, she's rescued a cat recently as well. But yeah, and now they've had Molly 12 years this summer, which is pretty amazing, and she's been given a good life. But just like when I think about all the dogs, and that's just dogs, that's before you get to any other animals that are neglected or abused. When I think about it, I get so overwhelmed and upset. I cry, like, I just can't. I'm like that woman in that cat video when she thinks about cats and she starts crying, and it's like, I don't know if it's a real video, but I kind of think it's real, because that's how I get when I start thinking about puppies and cat and dogs, and I'm like getting emotional and I'm crying, and it makes me feel really awful for all these animals, and it's out of my control. Yes, I've got a dog and she's rescued, and that's something that I'm doing, and maybe I can give to charities, or I can help whenever I see stray dogs or lost dogs in my local area, which I have done, and giving food to unhoused people for their dogs and stuff like that, and for the unhoused people as well, and giving them money for dog food and stuff like that. Those are things that I can do. But when it comes to all the dogs around the world, that's discomfort. I can't do anything about that. That's just out in the world, and I feel like that with all the issues that are going on. And again, it's something we're going to touch on in the final part of this video. But yeah, it's so uncomfortable, and yeah, I'm powerless to do anything about it. Another thing that really gets me is, you know, when you see, like, all these horrible websites like AliExpress and Shein, and you see like footage of like factories producing things, and you see like the most weird plastic bits of crap, right, that are being churned out day after day after day after day in factories. And where is it going? What is it doing? Who's buying all these little plastic tchotchkes? Who's buying all these little bits? Who's buying, like, it could just be anything, like fucking hair nets. And I listened to Izzard at the weekend, so I've got hair nets on the brain. Like, I don't know, like hair nets and carabiners, and I don't know, like fucking fidget spinners, and I don't know, like, just knowing that every day more and more, thousands upon thousands of like just stuff is just pumped out into the world. Don't even get me started on fast fashion. Where is it going? Where does it pile up? We know where it ends up, but at the same time, like, that knowing where it ends up ultimately is what's causing that anxiety, right? I can't do anything about it in the grand scheme of things, and it's chaotic. So for me, like, you know, you feel like you're stuck, right? You're bound. There's nothing you can do. You're surrounded, and you feel helpless, and the world is just absolute chaos. But you just have to get comfortable with the chaos to a certain extent, right? There are certain things that you just have no control on, and you have to just like pick your battles, or pick something, right? But like trying to tackle all of it is not going to happen. And this, like, you know, with this thing, like, there's too much choice and chaos, and I'm like, am I making the right choice? There's too many things out there everywhere. It's too much, and it feels like the chariot is just wheeling away, running away out of control. thousands of little tchotchkes being putting out into the world. Too many fucking choices whenever I'm trying to like whether I need to purchase something that I need, and there's like 12 million options, and I'm like, I just want like 3 options, I don't want 12 million, and it leads to this like this absolute like just anguish, and like you're pulling your fucking hair out, and it's too much, right? That kind of chaos, you kind of have to, I can really drive myself bananas with it, and I have to sort of I get to a point where I get so worked out about all these things that I just have to like, okay, like, what can I do right now? And if I can do something right now, then I'll try and do it. If I can't, you just gotta let it go. Just gotta let it go. You just gotta let that shit go. It's really, really tricky, right? So there's some forms of discomfort that are unavoidable. So for me, I live with a lot of pain, and there are a certain base level of pain that I am just gonna have day to day, and there isn't a huge amount I can do about it other than like get whacked out on painkillers, which is not something that I want to do all the time. I only do that when I really, really need to. And I'm fortunate that I'm at the moment, at least where I am at the moment now, I'm in a position where it's kind of manageable, where I just sort of manage my lifestyle around it, and it keeps it to a certain level, to a certain extent. But yeah, so that's a sort of unavoidable discomfort living with a chronic illness that causes chronic pain. It's an unavoidable form of discomfort for the most part for me. Maybe one day they'll find cures for all these kinds of illnesses, but I don't know if that'll happen anytime soon. So that's another thing that is typical to me, but also I know there are many other people out there that deal with that. So with all that being said about like injustices and, you know, the things being chucked out into the environment, constantly being like loads of tchotchkes being put out and then being dumped in landfill, and fast fashion ending up in landfill, what are the kinds of discomfort do we not accept, or should we not accept? So on a more personal level, I would say that your personal boundaries being transgressed is not something that should be acceptable level of discomfort. So I'll just pull this card out again, because this is a good example. This is someone that is holding the fort in this in this context, because people are trying to get past their boundaries. They're trying to infringe on their personal space. So these boundaries could obviously be like physical boundaries, personal space boundaries, but they could also be boundaries when it comes to, you know, just all sorts of things, you know, family or friends' behaviour towards you, or things that they might say or try and discuss with you that you're not willing to discuss. What comes to mind is going back to, say for example, trans folks having firm boundaries with family who they've had to maybe cut out of their life because they refuse to accept them, they refuse to, you know, they'll dead name them all the time, that kind of thing. And so they have very strong boundaries in place in order to protect themselves, so that they can live their life as themselves, as who they actually truly are. And that's often where you get like the support, hopefully, of found family, which is so important, and usually, especially in queer spaces and for queer people. So yeah, there's this sort of, you know, you shouldn't allow the discomfort of someone infringing your personal boundaries. And I saw a really good quote, and I've seen it before, but it was, you shouldn't let someone else's comfort override your personal safety. And this is a really good one. I think it was someone was tweeting about being catcalled now that it's summer or something, and this woman felt that she had to be polite to someone in order for her own safety, but to the point where it actually went over a line, and she, rather than sort of humouring this person, she sort of later reflected and said, I think maybe I should have just walked away from the situation straight away, but I was too concerned about being polite, because of women, or, you know, women are often socialised to be polite, and part of that is a self-preservation thing, but also it's partly like, smile darling, be polite, always be, you know, be helpful, and be, you know, So yeah, don't let someone else's comfort override your safety, which I thought was a really good one. So don't accept that, right? That's another form of discomfort that we shouldn't be allowing. And we shouldn't be allowing the discomfort that is caused by someone being hateful or violent. Again, this sort of goes on from the previous point. So whether that's towards someone being hateful or violent towards you, or to someone else, that you see someone else in discomfort. Obviously, I know everyone's mileage may vary, and it depends situation to situation what you're comfortable with. I'm the kind of person that will run towards danger when I see someone else, and my mum is the same. And my mum berates me for when I do it, or when she hears that I've done it. But I learnt from her, and so I think it's just inherent. I just can't not do it. So I've just always run towards the danger if I see. And I think it's because I've been in positions where I've not felt safe, or I've been harmed, or verbally or physically, and no one did anything, and I'm just like, I cannot. And that's within reason. If someone is running around waving a gun, less likely to happen here in the UK, but you never know. Or they're running around waving a sword or a machete or whatever it is, which has happened in the UK, I'm less likely to run towards the danger. But within reason, if I see, especially when I see young girls being sexually harassed by older men, I do that thing where I'm like, now that I'm older as well, I can do that. Oh, like, oh, I saw your mum yesterday, she said that you were such, and like pretend that I know them. And I just sort of ignore the other person that is like the guy that's infringing on this poor young, usually fucking schoolgirl, because and I've been in that position as a schoolgirl, don't necessarily feel confident enough, or have the sort of wherewithal, or have been sort of because they've been socialized, right? But also when you're younger, when you're like 13, 14, 15, to have that confidence to go, no, fuck off. And then, of course, there are teenagers that will do that, but quite often, especially if you're on your own and you're cornered, it's very frightening, especially from personal experience, I can say. I would also say we shouldn't accept being unkind to ourselves. So, because you spend the most time with you, and if you're gonna shit talk yourself, and like I'm always shit talking myself, but I'm getting better at like going, no, hang on, and stopping when I do it. When I do it, I'm getting better at sort of stopping and then going, oh, hang on. It's like when I say, like with tackling prejudices, when a certain thought pops up and I'm like, hang on, no, that's bullshit. Like that's some like ingrained white supremacist nonsense. You need to fucking dismantle that, knock that on the head. It's the same thing. Like when you're not the same thing. I'm not saying I'm being racist to myself. I'm just saying it's the habit of stopping yourself and thinking about what you're really doing and catching it. It becomes a habit. It becomes a habit of sort of stopping and going, oh, hang on, and then trying to reframe that and say something kind to myself. And affirmations really help with that, actually. So I don't think you should get comfortable. You shouldn't allow the discomfort of being mean to yourself, right? Don't get comfortable with that. Stop that shit, okay? So that's another one. And let's talk about social justice for a bit, because it's me, right? So I'm just can't help myself, really. Let's be honest. But I don't think we should accept this me personally, the discomfort of others that do not have even their basic needs met, right? So, for example, here in the UK, we've had a fuel crisis. We have the highest levels of poverty that we've had probably since Victorian London. The wage disparity, the wealth disparity is getting larger. More people are struggling to afford rent or mortgage. It's really, really rough. Inflation is out of control. Wages and salaries have stagnated. It's really, really rough. And so even sort of middle class, even up to some upper middle class folks are feeling the squeeze and are complaining about it. So if you know that they're feeling it, that it's been way worse for a really long time for a lot more people that are far poorer and far more sort of marginalized. And now that it's like affecting upper middle class people, suddenly it's like a real issue. Anyway, so But we shouldn't accept that people don't have homes or affordable housing. We shouldn't accept that people don't get paid a fair wage. This is why I will always support the strikes, even if they are inconvenient, because that is a form of discomfort that we have to get comfortable with. Strikes, especially if we're going to move forward with more like social justice and more sort of workers' rights and unions and things like that. We're going to have to get more comfortable with the discomfort of strikes, because that's the whole point of them. They're meant to be inconvenient because they're meant to like draw attention to the cause, right? So I don't think that we should be comfortable with the idea that you know, people don't have equal rights in the workplace or just in general when it comes to marriage equality or, you know, trans rights or you know, discrimination when it comes to someone's race or sex or gender or anything like that. Disability, ableism is a massive one, an absolutely huge one. Though we should not get comfortable with those, right? This is we got justice. We need to fight. We need to get that sword out. Not to worry too much about the scales right now. Just the sword. And get our defences. We've got to get this. We've got to push through, right? We've got to gird our loins, because, you know, justice and social justice work is it can be difficult, and it's ongoing. It's never ending, right? Which is exhausting and can be disheartening. And I've definitely had times where I'm just like, feel like nothing is happening. Like, say, for example, the climate crisis. I remember in the late 80s with my primary school, we went to Kew Gardens, where I went for my birthday in January, actually. And there was a whole thing about the rainforests and about the ozone layer, and it was a whole like environmental. They had a special exhibition on about environmentalism. I remember watching, you know, when they have like those 2 to 3 minute video clips where you sit and they sort of go on repeat in like a room. I remember sitting on the floor in a room and they were playing this thing about sort of environmentalism. There was acid rain. Do you remember the whole thing with acid rain? And they were talking about how in, you know, 30 to 40 years, how bad things can get if we don't start to do. And they were talking about like all the different extreme weather, and how weather is going to change, and the collapse of ecosystems and stuff like that. And it's far worse than people seem to realize. And people focus a lot on the extreme weather, which is a really big deal, don't get me wrong. It impacts so many people, but the collapse of ecosystems is the thing that's really going to get us, because once that goes, and it is starting to happen, we are fucked. The planet will endure, but we and many other species along with us will not. So yeah, I remember thinking, oh God, I hope the grown-ups do something about it. And here we are. Never underestimate the power of greed, because we still have people either just wanting to put their head in the sand. We have big corporations that are mostly to blame for all of this. You know, I can use my canvas tote bags and do my recycling and all those little things that I do. But ultimately, and every little bit helps, but ultimately the big change has to come from those big corporations, those big businesses. And unfortunately there's too much money in destroying the planet for them, and it's so short-sighted and it's disgusting. It makes me angry, and it's so easy to get disheartened. Actually, Lena Norms has a whole series on how to try to remain positive and hopeful and still work towards climate, to help towards the climate crisis and take action. So but I'll see if I can remember to, I think she's got a playlist. I'll see if I can remember to I'll put it in Lena Norms at the bottom there, see if I can remember to put it in the description. But yeah, she talks about that. So it's easy to become sort of disillusioned, but don't, right? And I think the problem is, right, you're balancing all these things. You're trying to balance everyday life. You're juggling too many things. Yeah, at first you're like, oh, it's all right. I've got my life stuff going on, and I'm like tackling, you know, ableism. Maybe you've raised the issue of ableism in your workspace, for example. Maybe it's not accessible. Maybe it doesn't cater to neurodivergent folks. It doesn't provide, you know, mental health support or services. I don't know, whatever it is, okay? But it can be so easy to get to here, because I'm the kind of person that is concerned about it all. I'm concerned. There we go. It was a bit blurry for a second. Out of focus, that's the term. It's very, very easy to take on too much. And that's the thing, like when I was talking about the dogs, obviously I care about dogs. But I care about a lot of other animals, like all animals. And then there's the environment itself, just in general, and the whole, and my local community, and queer folks, and like the specific focus at the moment seems to be on trans folks. But then I also care about biphobia, because that's a real issue. But then I care, there's ableism, and that's a real problem. And like racism is a huge problem, and poverty is a huge problem. Again, this is the thing, right? It's intersectional. It's all connected. And then once you realise that, that's when the penny drops. That's when it clicks. When you realise this is all tied in. I literally just started listening to the latest episode of Red Handed podcast, and it's about the Grenfell Tower disaster. And I don't know who outside of the UK might know about it, because it was the 6-year anniversary the other day. And I remember the morning that happened, and I woke up to see it burning. It was terrifying, and to know that people were burning to death, or anyway, it was awful. And I know people who lost people in that disaster. It's horrendous, and still nothing, and it was all off the bat. No one needed to die. Not a single person needed to die. And I've only literally like 4 or 5 minutes into the episode of the podcast, but it's something that I've tried to keep abreast of over the years to see how things have been progressing on that. But yeah, it's anyway, I can't remember what my point was. I was going to start talking about like, it's something to do with greed, and my brain's farted, squirrel brain, sorry. But anyway, it's very easy to like, there's too many things to be concerned about, to worry about. There's so many issues to give a shit about, right? And this is my mum, my bleeding heart lefty liberal, right? It can lead to this. So I think we shouldn't accept the injustices, right? We need to gird our loins. We need to pick a couple of things that we think we can manage to juggle, right? And avoid taking on too much. And of course, yeah, be the bleeding bleeding heart lefty liberal, right? But don't let it grind you down, okay? Don't let it lead you to despair. Baby steps. And I will talk a little bit actually about, because some people go, well, what can I do? I don't want to go to protest, or I don't feel safe at protests, or I don't have the wherewithal to like lobby my MP or your senator, or your, I don't know what you'd say in the US. So it depends where you are in the world, right? Well, you could be listening from Spain for all I know. Or like some people don't feel like they're very good at like maybe necessarily writing emails or stuff like that. Whatever your strengths lie, and if anything, if you really do struggle, just start with your local area. What's going on in your local area? Can you get involved in anything there, or anything that's set up? My local library just over the road there, they do lots of they run a lot of initiatives over there, and events and things like that, which is really, really cool. There's also a local like soup kitchen place. There's loads of things that you can get involved in if you if you feel the desire to, and like just try not to get overwhelmed. And it can also be just uncomfortable stepping your toe into those spheres if you've not done it before, but people tend to be pretty welcoming and kind. And it doesn't have to be, like people joke about slacktivism. Oh, I signed a petition and like donated some money, and what, you think that's enough activism? For some people that's all they can do, whether it's there because they are disabled and are maybe unable to leave the house and are unable to attend protest, or because they don't have the only thing they have the capacity for is to sign a petition. Or it's very ableist to say that unless you're actually boots on the ground at protests, or out at soup kitchens, or out campaigning, or at local ward meetings, with local like council ward meetings in the library usually, people think that anything else is not good enough, but that's not true. Every little bit, and you might find that once you sort of get a taste for it, you might want to keep going, but Anyway, this turned into a whole like, you know, social justice thing in the end, which wasn't the full sort of intent of the video, you know, like mutual aid, getting involved in mutual aid. We've got a local mutual aid group. So yeah, anyway, discomfort. Some forms of discomfort are really good. Yes, good. They feel gnarly, but they lead to growth, and that's a good thing. Leads to you being a better person, or just at least a less of a shit, right? Some forms of discomfort you can't really do much about, right? You know, like it's really, really hot today, and I've got the windows open and the curtain up. We don't have a fan at the moment. We need to get a fan, so that's something we can do, but I can't do anything about it right this second, right? So I'm sort of a bit uncomfortable, but it's okay. On saying that, that seems like a small thing, but when it does get exceptionally hot, because the UK isn't meant to deal with 40-degree heat, which we probably will get again later in the summer, people will die, and we shouldn't accept that. We shouldn't accept, because that's the climate. We need to rally for climate change. What's the word? Action. And also in the cold. So over Christmas, over the winter, because of the fuel crisis, and because of the food crisis, the concern that people are dying of hunger and of cold, and people literally, you know, there was news stories of people dying of hypothermia in their homes because they couldn't afford to heat them, or because they couldn't afford to eat. They were dying of starvation, and or both, right? Like, we shouldn't accept that. So seeing something a little bit warm or a bit chilly, a bit discomfort, fine, but extremes of that lead to death, not fine. So again, but I'm trying to wrap up, and I'm like making this video longer than it needs to be at this point because it's already at 45 minutes. But yeah, I hope it's a very sort of waffly, just, you know, we've talked about racism and transphobia and prejudices. We've talked about puppies. We've talked about climate change. We've talked about social justice. Yeah, we've talked about a whole bunch of things. So I'm just going to pull a card, I guess. This was an impromptu thing I wasn't planning to do. Let's pull a card for the end of the video for a message to take away, a collective message. I don't often do this, do I? But let's see what we got. What for your a message for the collective for today, or for whoever's watching this, whenever you're watching it, whenever you will be watching it. Boop, 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 boop. Boop, boop, boop. Oh, oh my god, are you kidding me? The hangman popped out. I'm going to take it. The hanged man. So yeah, maybe this video's made you feel defensive. Maybe it's made you feel bored. I mean, I wouldn't blame you. I do have a tendency to go on and on and on and on. But yeah, maybe take what I've said in this video. If it's made you feel a bit uncomfortable about your own behaviour or your own lifestyle choices or your own, I'm not trying to guilt people, I'm just saying, like, maybe just think about the things that you do, or the things that you care about, and what you do about them, or if you don't do anything about them, and where in your life are you feeling discomfort, and is that an acceptable discomfort for you, or is that something that you need to do something about it, or yeah, just going to leave you with that. I was going to go on a bit longer, but actually, yeah, this video is getting too long. So, but yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, as I usually say, bloody well done. Give yourself a pat on the back. I'm going to finish drinking this because I've been waffling so much. I've hardly drank any of my iced latte, my iced latte, which no longer has any ice in it because warm. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day, your night, whatever it is, to listen to me, to watch me waffle on about things that pop into my head and that sort of run through my brain, and things that I care about, things that I think about, things that I care about. Yeah, so it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but you know, that's always going to be the case. So yeah, you take care of yourselves. If you're watching this on Friday or Saturday or Sunday, I hope you have or are having a wonderful weekend, and yeah, I will see you in the next one.